Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at, how women are treated around the world.
And to do that, we'll be looking at the Social Institutions and Gender Index, or SIGI, as it's often called.
The SIGI. It's like this fascinating global report card that tries to put a number on discrimination against women in different countries.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
So for our listeners who might be new to the SIGI, can you give us a quick rundown? What is this thing all about?
Well, we often hear about gender equality in terms of laws and policies, right? But the SIGI goes further. It looks at the social institutions, cultural norms, religious practices, family structures, all that.
Okay, so it's like looking at the unwritten rules, the stuff that isn't always in the headlines.
Precisely. And these unwritten rules, they impact women's lives in a huge way.
Gotcha. So the SIGI is basically measuring how much discrimination women face because of these social institutions.
Exactly. It scores countries on a scale of 0 to 1, 0 being like perfect equality, no discrimination. And 1 means there's a lot of discrimination happening.
And we've got a map, right, showing all these SIGI scores around the world.
Yep. We've got a visual aid to guide us on our little world tour of gender equality.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's start exploring. But before we jump into specific regions, can you give us a little more context on why focusing on social institutions is so important? Like, what kind of impact do they actually have on women's lives?
Well, think about it. They shape everything. A woman's access to education, healthcare, job opportunities, her legal rights, even her personal safety and freedom.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to unpack. All right, let's get to our map. Starting with the Middle East and North Africa, lots of deep colors here. High SIGI scores. What's the SIGI telling us about this region?
Well, it's highlighting that in many of these countries, the social institutions tend to really limit women's choices and opportunities.
How so? Give us some examples.
Well, look at family codes. They often discriminate against women in matters of marriage, divorce, inheritance, or even just everyday cultural norms.
Like what?
Sometimes women need permission from a male relative to travel, work, or even open a bank account.
Wow, I see what you mean about these unwritten rules having a huge impact.
Yeah, it's not just about laws on paper.
It's about how those laws play out in everyday life. Okay, let's move on to Sub-Saharan Africa. It's looking a bit more mixed here on our SIGI map. What's the story?
It's a diverse region, so we see a range of scores.
So higher scores in some areas, lower in others. What's driving that variation?
Well, some countries are grappling with things like child marriage, female genital mutilation, really harmful practices that obviously impact the SIGI score.
Yeah, those are huge issues. But you said a range of scores, right? So some countries are doing better.
Exactly. There are some bright spots where they are actively working to empower women, passing laws, promoting education for girls.
Okay, so it's a mixed bag in Sub-Saharan Africa. Progress in some places, serious challenges in others.
Yeah, exactly. You can't generalize about such a diverse region. Each country has its own context.
All right, next up, North America and Europe. Ooh, the map just got a whole lot lighter.
Yeah, the SIGI scores are much lower here.
So does that mean women in these regions don't face any discrimination?
Not necessarily. There are still problems, of course. But generally speaking, these countries have strong legal frameworks promoting gender equality. Equal pay laws, protection against violence, access to health care, things like that.
And those legal frameworks are reflected in the lower SIGI scores.
Right. But, and this is interesting, even within this region, there are differences.
Like what?
The U.S., for instance, has a higher SIGI score when it comes to financial services for women compared to, say, Canada.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, it's a bit surprising. Shows that even in countries with seemingly similar laws, those social institutions can still create different outcomes.
Fascinating stuff. All right, let's head over to Asia. Looks like another mixed bag of SIGI scores.
Definitely. We see some higher scores in countries like India and China where, cultural norms often favor sons.
Right. We've all heard about the preference for boys in those countries. How does that translate to discrimination against women?
Well, it can mean limited inheritance rights for daughters, fewer opportunities for education and work, things like that.
So those deeply ingrained cultural preferences, they have real consequences.
Yeah, unfortunately. But then you've got other parts of Asia, like some East Asian nations, where there's been a big push for women's empowerment. More women in leadership roles, more focus on education for girls.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Nope, definitely not. Each country has its own unique context.
Okay, let's swing over to Latin America. What's the SIGI telling us about this region?
Latin America has seen a lot of progress in recent years.
How so?
There's been a surge in social movements fighting for women's rights. And it's translated into real policy changes, especially around family law, political representation, and addressing gender-based violence.
That's inspiring.
Definitely. It shows that activism and social change can make a real difference.
All right, last stop on our world tour, Oceania.
Oceania. A region of contrasts, for sure.
What do you mean?
Well, you've got Australia and New Zealand with those low SIGI scores, indicating relatively good gender equality, but then some of the Pacific Island nations face a different reality.
So the map doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly. It's important to remember that even within a region, even within a single country, there are going to be variations in women's experiences.
So much nuance to consider. Well, this has been a fascinating journey, and I think the SIGI really drives home a key point. To truly understand gender equality, we need to understand culture, the unwritten rules, those underlying social forces that shape women's lives.
Absolutely. The SIGI gives us that deeper perspective. It reminds us that laws and policies are just part of the equation. If we want real equality, we need to challenge those ingrained social norms that hold women back.
So, as our listeners continue to think about this issue, what are some questions they should be asking themselves? What other factors might be at play beyond what the SIGI captures? And how can we all contribute to a more equitable world?
Great questions. It's not about simple answers, but about keeping those conversations going, challenging our own assumptions, and pushing for change. That's how we make a difference.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a world where gender equality is a reality for everyone, everywhere.
Hear, hear.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.